Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into a deeply profound historical and spiritual journey today, opening up the ancient text of the book of Ezra, specifically chapter 5. It's an absolutely incredible story about loss, stagnation, and ultimately revival. This is a narrative from 2.5 millennia ago, yet it speaks directly and honestly pretty powerfully to how we build or entirely neglect our own foundations today. So let's jump right in. Okay, let's dive into this. Have we become accustomed to our faith being paused? Back in ancient Jerusalem, the massive undertaking of rebuilding the temple was completely halted. And I don't mean for a few months, I mean for 16 long years. Actually, just think about what happens to the human mind when something stops for that long. It just becomes the new normal, right? Fast forward to our modern world. Think back to the COVID-19 pandemic. Worship services were paused, community was totally distanced, and for a while it felt deeply uncomfortable. We missed it. But after a year or two, honestly, we kind of got used to it. The spiritual lethargy just became familiar. It became easier and far more efficient to just stay disconnected. That creeping apathy, that is exactly the danger the people in the book of Ezra were facing. 16 years of paused familiarity. Let's look at how this tragic shift happened. You see, the story began with this incredible roaring momentum. Thanks to a miraculous decree from the Persian king Cyrus, over 42,360 exiles made the massive journey back from Babylon to Jerusalem. To put that into perspective, that's enough people to fill a modern baseball stadium. And the very first thing they did upon arriving, they built the altar. They started worshiping again. Then they laid the foundation of the actual temple. The source text tells us this was a moment of overwhelming emotion. Some people shouted for sheer joy, while the older folks who actually remembered the original glory of the first temple wept loudly. It was this beautiful, deafening noise that could literally be heard from miles away. But then, the timeline just flatlines. The massive, energetic project grinds to a complete, devastating halt for 16 years. The foundation was just left out in the rain, slowly overgrown with weeds and totally forgotten. So, what on earth happened? Why did that amazing momentum just die? Well, it was because of fierce opposition from the surrounding mixed-blood nations. These were people who originally offered to help, but because they held on to foreign idols alongside God, their help was rejected by the Jewish leaders who wanted to remain faithful to the law. And that rejection turned instantly into hostility. The enemies deployed two devastating tactics to completely halt God's work. First, psychological pressure. The scriptures say they weakened the hands of the builders. They didn't even use weapons, they used words. They mocked them, asking what good their pathetic little temple would be, just draining the physical strength right out of them. Second, they used administrative blockage. They essentially created ancient red tape, writing letters to the Persian king, falsely claiming Jerusalem was a rebellious city and warning that tax revenues would stop if the walls were built. And, the political maneuvering worked perfectly. An official cease and desist order was issued. The prophet Haggai later points out a really stark dichotomy. On one side, you have the ruined temple, a bare, weed-infested stone foundation sitting totally abandoned. On the other side, you have paneled houses. Over those 16 years, the people focused purely on their own lives, building luxurious wooden-paneled homes for themselves. The real tragedy wasn't just that the work stopped by a royal decree, it was that the people became perfectly content walking past the ruins of God's house every single day without feeling any pain whatsoever. We have to pause and ask ourselves right here. Are we building our own comfortable, paneled lives while leaving our spiritual lives in ruins? Which brings us to section 2, the word breaking the silence. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the 16-year silence is shattered. And look at what breaks it. It wasn't a change in the political climate. The Persian king didn't suddenly get nicer, the enemies were still there, living right next door, and the economy hadn't miraculously improved. Simply put, God's word came first. God spoke through two specific prophets, Haggai and Zechariah. The sudden, powerful arrival of divine revelation was the sole catalyst that woke the people up from their long, comfortable sleep. It made the familiar ruins look painful to them once again. Listen to the sheer authority in Haggai's message. Haggai 1:8 says, "Go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build my house." There is absolutely no ambiguity here. It's a direct, undeniable command. Haggai didn't just offer spiritual platitudes or a nice theological theory. He commanded immediate physical action. It was a loud wake-up call to shake off the apathy, get up out of those paneled houses, climb the mountain, and get back to work.
Now, what's really interesting here is how this perfectly balances Haggai's message. While Haggai provided the urgent push to take physical action, Zechariah provided the deep spiritual comfort. Zechariah 4:6 says, "Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit." You see, starting over is terrifying. The people were afraid they'd just fail again. So Zechariah steps in to say, hey, you aren't doing this in your own human strength. You don't need immense political power or military might. You just need to step out, and God's Spirit will provide the power to finish it.
Section 3, the people rising up again. Let's see how they responded. Here, we see a truly beautiful display of unity. The leaders who had been sitting in the exact same apathy for 16 years finally stand up. Zerubbabel, the political leader from the royal line of David, and Joshua, the religious high priest, rise up together. They were in very different roles, but they moved in the exact same direction. And my absolute favorite detail? The prophets Haggai and Zechariah didn't just preach from a stage and walk away. The text tells us they stayed on site and physically helped build the temple. They literally got their hands dirty alongside the people, laying heavy stones and carrying timber. Now that is true spiritual leadership in action. But of course, as many of us know, the moment you step out in obedience, opposition flares up. The peace of their apathy was broken. A regional official named Governor Tattenai arrives and aggressively interrogates them, asking, "Who authorized you to rebuild this temple?" It's the exact same threatening interrogation tactic from 16 years ago. The people must have felt a sickening sense of déjà vu. The threat of another letter being sent to the Persian king, another royal decree to stop, it was all happening all over again. And finally, Section 4, God's Eyes Upon Us. This is the true climax of our story. 16 years ago, the political threats worked perfectly, and the people dropped their tools in fear. But this time, Ezra 5:5 gives us this remarkably warm pastoral detail. God's eyes were watching over the elders of Judah. Even though the exact same political threats returned, the builders didn't freeze. They didn't pack up and go hide in their comfortable paneled houses. They kept right on building while the political letter was being sent. Why? Because they deeply realized that the protective, watchful eyes of God were fixed right on them. The enemy's threats couldn't paralyze them anymore, simply because God's gaze empowered them. So the crucial point is this highly practical, 3-step blueprint for spiritual awakening that we can pull directly from the text. Step 1. The word comes first. It's not our willpower or improved circumstances. It's God's voice breaking through our familiarity. Step 2. People rise up. We have to actually respond to that word. We have to leave our comfort zones and take action. Step 3. Overcoming opposition. Expect pushback. The moment you start building, resistance will come. But you push through it by knowing for a fact that God's Spirit is with you. I want to end today by leaving you with this final provocative thought. Will you take the first step to rebuild today, knowing God's warm eyes are watching over you? Whether you're dealing with the lingering spiritual apathy left behind by the pandemic, past failures that haunt you, or the mocking voices of outside opposition, you do not have to stay sitting in the ruins. You can start laying the stones again today.